Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm Elizabeth Churchill, and I head up research for material design. And I'm sure you've been hearing about a lot of the innovations that material has brought out recently here at I/O. And we've done a lot of research in the background to back up much of that innovation. And what we're going to do today is just tell you a little bit about some of that research. We're also going to encourage you to come and talk to us later, and we will be in Dome F, because we're interested in knowing how you're integrating research into your product and design system development. But before I get going, I want to know how many people out there consider themselves to be developers? Yay! Welcome, thank you for coming. And how many consider themselves to be designers? And you might have multiple roles. Wonderful. This is great. Finally, researchers. Yay, research! Welcome, welcome, welcome. One of the things we want to emphasize in this talk, and that material is extremely committed to, is that we believe the tight collaboration between engineering and development, between design and research, really is the key to creating great user experiences. And by user experiences, I mean the users of the things that you build, but also you as users. Because in material, as you will see, and you've been hearing, we build products for you so that you can build great products for your users. So I just wanted to go over a few things about material which you may know, just to remind you. So the material design system is open source, it's adaptable, and it helps you bring high quality experiences to your users. And our aim is to help you make things that are beautiful, but that are usable and useful, and also, importantly, accessible. We're very committed to helping you do that. So, material consists of components, and components are things like buttons, things like text fields, and things like tables. You're familiar with that. And at this I/O, we have brought material theming into the picture. And we've heard you, and we have responded because we want to make all of these components customizable so that you can adapt them for your experience, so that you can have your brand and your look and feel for your users all the way through systematically, from design to code. So that's very much a key part of our innovation. Material also consists of patterns. Patterns like account switching, accessing settings, or handling empty states. All of this information, these components, these themes, and these patterns roll up into guidance that you can see on our site, our spec. If you have not yet checked out material.io, please do so. Please go and have a look, check out what we've got there, and send us feedback. Because a great part of this talk is to remind you that we can shape great experiences for people with the help of folks like you. So we need your feedback. Material also, as I mentioned, has a suite of products and tools that are designed for you. One of them is here. This is Gallery. And Sara is going to be talking about Gallery in a bit of detail later. Gallery has also been launched here at I/O. And again, we want your feedback. Gallery will allow you to take those components, those themes, and that guidance and turn it into reality. We're really building these tools to build this relationship and this collaboration, the deep collaboration between design and development. So just as a pause, this is the outline of the kinds of research we do in this team, in the Material Experience Research team. The most granular research is on components, and Michael is going to be taking you through some of that. Here we look to make sure the components really are beautiful and usable and useful and accessible. The next level of research is the product research on things like gallery. And here again, we use interviews and observations, and we work with folks like you to make these tools great. Sara's going to be taking you through some of that. Finally, we look at workflow. Where do all of these tools fit into your lives as designers and developers? How do you pull these together to accomplish the things you need? What is the bigger ecosystem of the idea to design, to develop, to iterate, workflow? And again, we do interviews, we do behavioral studies, we observe folks in workplaces like where you work. We do surveys to try and understand where our tools fit in for you now, how we can improve them, and to start to think about where we need to go in the future as the whole field explores and innovates. And Sara is going to help you with that. So, with that said, from our studies with a few users to thousands of users, from our close studies as we talk to you, to our surveys, we're going to give you a bit of a flavor of that today. And I would like to hand off to Michael, who's going to talk about components research.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, Elizabeth, and once again, welcome everyone. My name is Michael, and I lead up research on material system. So, as Elizabeth mentioned, we do research on everything that covers the minor details of users' experience, all the way up to the big picture. We look at everything from how things look on the web or on your mobile device, to how those things come together to form an application or a brand or an experience. For today, I'm going to be focusing on two types of research that we've done, both examining the components of a design system. First, I'll go into some detail on the top-down experimental work that we've done, which looks into how the details of design can really impact how your users interact with your products. And second, I'll go through some of the bottom-up experiential research that we've done, focusing on those same components, but also aiming to understand how experiences come together in our products and what those experiences mean to our users. And by the end, I'm hoping to give everyone a better understanding about how we do some of the research here at Google, so you can take that back and do it within your own teams. But first, a little background on what I mean when I say components. Elizabeth already introduced some of the components, the patterns, and the guidelines available in material design. Here we have three examples of abstractions of those components. And just to introduce them, on the left, we have the material fab, or the floating action button. This was introduced in the first iteration of material design, and since has become one of its more recognizable characteristics. In the center, we have the material text field, and this provides a core means for users to input content into applications. And on the right, material buttons, which provide a core means of interacting with content in applications. And you probably are all familiar with these already, but what I want to call out here is not that these components are necessarily unique or that they're earth-shatteringly critical to any one single interaction, but that these components are a fundamental part of a larger experience. And because of that, we want to make sure that we understand these components at a fundamental level. But for now, we're going to focus just on this first one, the material text field. So this is the text field that we started with. This was our baseline. This text field performed well, and it aligned with the original material vision. But there was an opportunity to make sure that it worked even better, that it worked across all devices, that it worked in both consumer and enterprise applications. And when you look at something like this, think of all the different parts that have to come together to make a text field. There's the underline that indicates where the field starts and where it stops. There's the label that hints at what might be typed in there. And there's the text itself once you've entered it. And of course, there's the shape of the entire component, how each of those individual parameters come together, and then how they're used on a page. So it's clear that even for a text field, there's a lot going on design-wise. But really, how many options could there be? Well, it turns out quite a lot. And as an aside, I'm not expecting everyone to read through the actual text on this slide. I just want to show a few of the details that we're considering here. So what we're looking at here is an exploration of label placement, as well as some of the possible values and consideration for label placement. But we also looked at things like background fill. We looked at different elements of style, different types of contrast, and of course, whether there should be squared or rounded borders. In the end, there were over 140 different variations that we looked at in a couple different contexts. First, we looked at simple forms, which had stub content that was procedurally drawn so that we could test a whole bunch of them. Second, we looked at real quote-unquote forms, which were forms that we actually took from the wild and then inserted our experimental text fields. And then third, we looked at complex forms. And these are forms we hope you would never encounter, in nature. They're unreasonably complex, but we created them to see how each text field would perform in extreme circumstances. Would it stand out too much, or would it get lost entirely? And we'll show examples of that one in a minute. But first, what does that look like? This is ultimately a tool that we created that would create each of those forms with each of those text fields, randomly drawing the layout, the theme, and each of the characteristics that we had identified. We then deployed these forms in a set of large-scale surveys so that we could test both the performance of every individual text field as well as get an idea of what users actually preferred. And on the right, you can see the admin interface for this tool that we built. And it's simple, but it allows us to zero in on the types of designs that we want to research. And more importantly, it provides us with an artifact that we can share with the designers and developers who are creating and building these text fields. And maybe you're curious about the complex forms. Well, this is what I mean when I say complex forms. We don't condone their use in the wild, but this is just so you know the lengths designers will go to make sure that every opportunity is explored. And they really are something. What we were able to do in the end was to create a way for people to interact with ideas rather than products. And to be clear, we weren't doing this research as a way of telling designers what products should look like. We were doing research as a way of working with designers to show them what parts seem to work and what parts might require caution, to provide them with the tools that ultimately can allow us to more effectively bring our users into the conversation. And this is one example of what that conversation looks like. This is what the data actually is from those text field experiments. And without going into too many of the details, I want to show you how we were looking at all the possible text fields, every possible combination, without dropping any of those possibilities because the data says this or that. Each step that I'm showing you here involved a process of working with our team to explore the landscape and to provide our designers and engineers with the tools that they can use to create great products. And here I'm referring to research and the artifacts from research as one of those tools. And here is the before and after example of what just one text field might look like given this approach. Because ultimately what we aim to do is to support design that is more usable, more useful, more beautiful, and importantly, more customizable, especially with today's enhanced material design system and the introduction of material theming. We want to emphasize that the components are customizable, and that within that customizability, we've done the legwork to make sure that those components will still work the way they should. And importantly, that they'll still look the way that you want them to. So that's a quick look at some of what we've done with the material text field. But let's take a look at the fab and the button next. At the beginning, I mentioned that we'd be looking at both the top-down experimental research that we'd done, as well as the bottom-up experiential research. And this may look familiar to many of you, this bottom-up research. It usually involves sitting down with your users across a table, sometimes in something like usability studies, sometimes in things like interviews. And frequently, it looks a lot like just a normal conversation. But what we try to do as researchers is to make sure that we're asking the right questions. And that's not always, how long does it take 10,000 users to click on this? Sometimes what we want to know more about is how the users think and feel about our products and about interactions. Because material design is about the performance and the usability of components, but it is also about that look and that feel. So next, I'm going to show 3 examples to give you a sense about how users feel about these components and what that means for our design. So this first example is from a study participant who is interacting with the new material button. And she said, when the boxes are really bolded like that, it makes you feel like you're actually pressing a button. And sometimes something like this that happens in the middle of these interviews will make you actually take a step back and ask yourself, what is a button really? And really, what should a button look like if we define it by how it feels when we press it? Or what should a button look like if it's trustworthy? And these aren't just strictly questions for fun either. There is an entire landscape of what buttons might look like, of what they might be, of what is buttony. And part of the research we get to do is to better understand that landscape. And we get to do that by talking with our users. And the second example is from a study participant who was interacting with the Google Material-themed fab, shown here. And she said, the last time I looked at your email app, it didn't look as googly as this. And I love this because when we actually talk to our users, we learn about more than just the components. We learn about more than just the interactions or the products. And in this example, we can clearly see how design can impact brand. But we get a better sense from the user's own perspective about what seems to jump out at them. And in the end, we can speak more effectively about the meaningful characteristics of brand with the designers and the developers who are building these. And this last example is a quote from a study participant who could use assistive devices to see, but he was actually legally blind. And he was interacting with the Google Material-themed extended fab shown on the bottom. He said, it actually jumps out a little bit more, even without the color. It pops out. It just seems more obvious what's going on there. And I think this is one of the main strengths of actually sitting down and talking with our users. In the same way, we want to explore how 100 different text fields can be implemented in 100 different ways. We want to see how these components in our products are encountered by all our users. It's a different way of looking at the exact same landscape. To wrap things up, I've shown you a brief look at how we've approached a couple different types of research. First, looking at the material text field from the top down, experimentally. And second, looking at the fab and the button from the bottom up. I'm hoping you can see some of the similarities of these two approaches. On the one hand, we are aiming to better understand a whole range of possible expression to better support the brilliant designers and engineers who are building material design. And on the other hand, we are aiming to better support our users to make sure that each component is usable, is useful, is beautiful, no matter how it's used or by who. And last, again, I'm hoping you might be able to take some of the ideas we've talked about here to be able to do research within your own teams. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and welcome Sara to the stage, who's going to be talking a little bit about designer and developer research.
Thank you, Michael. So as Michael said, I'm Sara, and I lead research for material product. And what we do is create products and tools, resources for designers and developers just like you. So Michael shared with you how we do research with our end users so that we can really understand how to make our components most effective, but you are our end users too. And designers and developers is where I put my energy to understanding our products and how you're using them to make them better. So what I'm going to talk about is the other two types of research Elizabeth mentioned, the workflow research and product research. And I'll give you examples of how products that have launched here at I/O have been made better through our research. So let's start with workflow research. This gives us a really big, broad picture for how people creating digital tools, people like you, how you're doing your work day in and day out. Usually how this looks is I'll interview ideally designers and developers who work together. I'll go to your office. I'll talk to you about how you're working. I want to know all the tools you're using, who you're collaborating with, and especially anything that's a problem in your workflow. And our goal with this kind of research is to get a big picture of the bigger problems that affect a lot of people so we can prioritize building tools that solve those problems for you. So this example is from workflow research we did with designers and developers that work together. Like I said, we went to their offices. And one of the things we had them do is take us through a recent project from beginning to end. We had them walk us through every part of the project, who they worked with, what the tools they were using, and especially anything that was a struggle. So here's a couple of examples of how people think about their work. So you can see people look at their work in really different ways. Whenever I do this kind of research, I want my developer, designer, and product manager colleagues working on those products to come with me because everyone hears different things and different things pop out at them during the interviews. So we always do a debrief where we compare notes on what we heard and what was interesting or surprising. And because this research was really focused on understanding the UX design process itself, we were going to be doing a timeline of a typical UX design project. And so I had my colleagues categorizing the different phases that they heard the people we talked to went through. So let me show you what this turned into. This is a UX design workflow. It's also known as a journey map or experience map. But what we ended up with was 6 phases for the design process: discovery, initial design, iterating on the design, validating, beginning building, and then the final implementation. And I'll explain the structure first, and then I'll come around and fill in some details. So below that, in the green to red, are a single positive and a negative key moment in each phase. And those were from stories we literally heard from the participants we talked to that were either really meaningful or were a pattern we heard several people talk about. And then at the bottom, we had the tasks, pain points, and tools. And this gave us a really rich range of experiences that we heard different people using. Now, I took that out to just simplify it to show you, but that whole thing is a big poster that hangs in our office. So for instance, thinking about the key moments, often we heard people get really excited when they're starting a new project. There's a lot of promise and potential, but they quickly get overwhelmed by scope or scope creep, so that becomes a negative moment. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of interplay between designers and developers here. The first one is when, in the initial design phase, when a designer is really excited about an idea they have, and they have to go to their developer, and the developer says to them, we cannot build this. These technical constraints make this impossible. So has anybody here ever had one of those conversations? Okay, all right, that's good that we're resonating with your experiences as well. But of course, there's positive interactions between designers and developers throughout this process. We definitely have heard that designers do not enjoy making design specs for handing a project off to a developer. But when that moment comes where they get to hand off formally to a developer, that's usually a milestone, a really positive milestone in a project. So that's positive. And it can go south again, because what happens often is that developers come back later with unexpected problems due to legacy code, and the designers have to step back in, often after they've already moved on to another project. So again, is this resonating? Anybody had this happen? Okay, all right. So the whole point of doing this kind of really deep dive into understanding the practices, again, is to surface those problems that affect a lot of people so we can prioritize building them. And I just want to take a minute and define, I mentioned design specs, and I'll talk about it more in a minute, but when I say design specs, what I mean are the margins, guidelines, colors, fonts, and often even behaviors that designers give to developers when they're getting ready to implement a design. So another thing that came out of that research is pain points of designers and developers, and I'll go through these with you. So the key pain points we heard from designers are having to aggregate feedback from a lot of different stakeholders. Often the feedback is living in different tools. Having to prototype motion but not having time to do it. Having to keep track of different project resources that they're going to need at different phases of the design process that often are living in different places. Now remember this, because I'll show you a solution that we came up with for this in Gallery. Creating design specs, as I mentioned, and then having to share design assets across their team and keep them consistent. Top pain points we heard for developers was having to solve for edge cases and often responsiveness from a singular happy path that they're getting from their designer. Getting incomplete design specs, or getting ones that are wrong, or not getting them at all. Absolutely have heard that one a lot as well. When you have to create a new component, trying to figure out, am I going to customize something that's existing or build something new from scratch? Getting design changes late after you've started working, leading to rework, and finally having a lack of context of what the intent was with a design, so not knowing what really matters. So you'll notice with this kind of list that both designers and developers both found design specs as a real pain point. So it was this kind of research that let us realize what a problem this is for both roles, and let us prioritize building a tool that solves this problem. And that project is, as Elizabeth mentioned, is Gallery, and I'm going to tell you more about Gallery in a minute. But before I do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the other type of research I mentioned, product research. And this is really just a big bucket for any time we show you something that we want to get your feedback on. It may be a really early stage idea that we just want to validate and make sure the concept is sound, or maybe it's a refinement of a product we've already invested a lot of time in, and we just want to make sure that it's really functioning well for how you want to use it. So a lot of people call this usability, but for us, this type of research is doing so much more than just telling us if a product is usable. So, and also let me walk you through a little bit about how I conduct research when I'm doing product research with designers and developers. So this is one of our research labs on the left. Usually I'll bring somebody into our lab, I'm meeting with them one-on-one. It's streaming to a room that my designer, developer, and product manager colleagues are sitting in, like the one on the left. And I'll walk you through some kind of prototype or beta tool and getting your feedback as we go along. Like, what do you like? What's confusing? And especially at the end, I want to know, how does this fit into your existing workflow? Is this going to solve any problems for you? And then after all that is done, go back in, talk to my colleagues, and we figure out what was really interesting here. What can we take from this that we can use to make our products better? So now I've told you a little bit about how this process works. Let me walk you through an example of something we learned when we were doing research with Gallery and how that made it better for the final product. So has anybody seen a demo of Gallery in the, okay, just a couple folks, and let me walk you through. So this is a project page in Gallery. And also let me just give an overview. Gallery is an online collaborative tool that lets designers share their designs with other colleagues, get feedback, and it also has a design specs feature where they can get the metadata from the sketch goes into an online way for developers to get the code and the values. And then the developers also have an access to material components in that Gallery feature if they're using the material components when they're designing. And it's being demoed in Dome F over there if you want to check it out. So we're in a project called Posivibes. There's a little description of the project at the top. The colored rectangles are a way for designers to collect the links that they're going to need at different stages of the project. So as I mentioned, we were solving one of the problems we uncovered in the research with that one. And then below that are basically folders, and people can organize them however they want. In this case, they're organized by the device that it's being designed for. So let's say you clicked into the tablet view from here. You would see all the screens that are in that tablet. And if you clicked into the first screen, then you're going to see that screen in more detail. Now, at the yellow box at the top, you can see all the different things you can do from here. You can comment, inspect, you can share it. But what's happening here is someone has rolled over the type at the top, and you can see it's got the typeface, the weight, the color. All that stuff is right there for the developer to access. So that's how it looks now. And let me show you something that we were getting feedback on a couple months ago when we did some research on it. So this looks a little bit different because it's the older mock, but you can see it's basically the same thing. So in the study, what we did is we were talking to designers. We had them use our new material theme editor, which I hope you've heard about the material plugin we have for Sketch. And that gives them access to all these pre-built material components where they can customize for their own brand. So that the one in the green bar, the green bottom app bar, they had customized that in Sketch and changed the color and changed one of the icons in there. And then they had uploaded that to Gallery where they were looking at what they would be sharing with their developers. So we were wanting to know, what do you think of this? And what we heard from them, as you can see here, when you roll over that bottom app bar, what you're getting is the link to the code and the specs for that, but you're not getting any more granular information beyond the size of that entire bar. And what we heard designers saying is like, well, I want to see what that shade of green that I changed it to was. I want to make sure it's my right brand color. And I want to see what that icon was. I want to make sure it's the right icon in there. So what we heard is that they wanted a lot more granular data for the material components than we were showing them in Gallery. And we had it, we just didn't put it in there. So this was a really important thing for us to know. So this is the final version that's been released. So as you can see, you've still got that bottom app bar, but when you roll over any single component inside it, you get that really granular data for that particular component, in this case, the size and of that diamond-shaped fab. So this is just one of many examples of how the research has made our products launching here at I/O better. Another one is the Material I/O homepage. So in the same research I'm talking about, we also got feedback on an earlier version of the homepage design. And we heard from designers that they really like to get overview videos of any kind there's a new evolution of something, so they can get a quick sense of what's changed. And we had that, but it was at the bottom of a really long page, and nobody found it before they were able to click on the video. So what we did is in the website that went live a couple days ago, right underneath that fold, that video is really prominent. So we made it really easy for you all to get a quick overview of what's new in Material. So what I've just gone through with you is giving you some examples of how we use workflow research to identify the big problems that we want to put our time into solving, and how product research improves the product no matter what stage it's in, and how we use products that we're releasing at I/O, how we use research on these products to make them better. And if you want to go check out Gallery, go to material.io/tools. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Elizabeth now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. So just a little bit of a wrap-up and a reminder of the invitation to visit us in Dome F. And so what we've shown you today is just a flavor of the ways we're using traditional methods for research, as well as inventing new methods to understand how the components work for everyday users in terms of beauty and aesthetics, in terms of usability, in terms of sort of usefulness, but also accessibility. And Sarah has shared how important it is for you to send us feedback on our products, because we do want to work with you to make sure that your lives are easier in this pretty difficult workflow process from idea to product that really works. Another thing I want to let you know is that we know that many of you don't have research teams. We're lucky enough to have one. And so we think of ourselves as the research system that aligns with the design system and the engineering system. And we have committed to writing up some of the methods that we're using and inventing, and we'll be sharing that along with the other guidance and spec, and sharing how these methods can help you understand how our tools work for your context. Because as Michael said very clearly, your context might be slightly different from our own. So we will be sharing more of that with you over the next year. And so finally, I hope you take away how we're bringing together design and development and engineering and research, and how we're really treating this as a conversation, and a conversation that needs to be a rich one. And so with that said, thank you again for your attention. Please come and join us in Dome F, Tent F, I should say, at Design and Accessibility. And again, thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming.